Another wet and soggy Daytona 500 ends in flames, but this year it's an underdog nabbing his first ever NASCAR win. How's it going, y'all? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove Daytona 500 edition. Kudos to any of you who may be watching shortly after this is uploaded. It's been a long Daytona day. 3 p.m. start, throw in a 6.5 hour rain delay, and I am recording this thing well past midnight on the East Coast. I'm gonna try to touch on just about everything from the pre-race to, the first few laps leading up to the rain delay, to then the single file racing we saw after the rain delay, the fiery, devastating crash we saw on the final lap, and then of course today's winner. I'm gonna hit on everything. We're gonna get to it in just a moment. Today's episode is sponsored by Blue Emu. Blue Emu is the official pain relief cream of NASCAR. Blue Emu products non-greasy, deep penetrating formula gets deep into your muscles and joints to work its magic. It works fast and you won't stink. Landon would be proud of me. Blue Emu is all over NASCAR. Last year they sponsored the Martinsville night race. Look at this, signed by Rusty Wallace. Be on the lookout. We might have to give this thing away sometime soon. You've seen Blue Emu on race cars. Now they're great supporters of Out of the Groove as well. The official pain relief cream of NASCAR, available in stores nationwide. Check out Blue Emu. We have a lot to get to tonight and I'm feeling a bit delirious, so we're gonna see how this goes. I'm gonna start with the finish. We're gonna work backwards, sort of. Let's talk about the closing laps. For much of tonight's race, we were treated to the dreaded Daytona train. Right around the top, single file for the most part, not a whole lot of passing or jostling for positions, and stage 3 was no exception to the rule. For most of stage 3, the only exception really being that brief period during green flag pit stops, we saw single file racing. 5 laps to go, 4 laps to go, 3 to go. Not until they were coming to the white flag, like less than a lap and a half to go, did we start to see the leaders make moves on each other. Joey Logano had been pacing the field since those final green flag pit stops. He had his teammate Brad Keselowski make a move underneath Kevin Harvick to get up to second. The two Penske cars were in control of this race on the white flag lap, with fellow Ford teammate Michael McDowell, a super sneaky good super speedway racer with Yates power under the hood. 1, 2, 3 with the field jostling behind them. Down the back straightaway with half a lap to go, Brad Keselowski got a huge push from Michael McDowell. He faked high, then he went low to try and pass his teammate Joey Logano. Remember, Brad Keselowski has never won the Daytona 500. He's won a lot in this sport. He's a champion, but he's never won the Great American Race. He wasn't going to just sit by and let his teammate coast to the victory, so he made a move to the inside. Logano went to block, and that set off a massive, a fiery crash. And we say fiery often to embellish, but there's really no way to embellish this wreck. That was a literal fireball. It looked like an asteroid crashing down to Earth there in turn 3. I mean, I have not seen that much fire coming off multiple cars in a wreck in a long time, maybe ever. Keselowski's car even got sent up into the catch fence. The rear end got ripped off by the catch fence there in turn 3, but luckily, somehow, thankfully, all the drivers involved were able to get out of their cars. No serious injuries were sustained. All 3 remaining Penske cars were destroyed in that race, including Austin Cindric, who piled into that wreck late, but it was Michael McDowell who was able to shoot into the lead as Keselowski and Logano went spinning in front of him. Chase Elliott made a late run, but the caution came out for good reason. I want to get this out of the way. NASCAR was right to throw the caution there. I mean, like I said, you just saw it. That was one of the fieriest crashes I've ever seen. Hard hits like that, you gotta throw the caution. NASCAR was consistent in this case, so good call, calling the caution. It's a shame. We like to see him race back to the line, but this was the correct call and the consistent call. NASCAR threw the caution. Michael McDowell was clearly in the lead with Chase Elliott not too far behind Austin Dillon in third. Michael McDowell, the 36-year-old driver from Arizona, driving for Bob Jenkins' Front Row Motorsports, gets his first career NASCAR Cup Series win on the sport's biggest and brightest stage. He is your 2021 Daytona 500 winner. What a fantastic story. Saw some great energy from him in his post-race interview. Really excited for him and that entire team. That's an underdog team. That's sure they have a Ford logo on their hood, and sure, we've seen them run well at these super speedway races in recent years. Remember, David Reagan and David Gilliland finished 1-2 at Talladega back in 2013. But this is not a team you expect to see win races. Michael McDowell has sort of been a journeyman driver for much of his career. You do not expect him to win the Daytona 500, but that's one of the things that makes this race so great. Yes, it's a spectacle. Yes, it's huge. Yes, it's terrifying and explosive, but it also grants the occasional Cinderella story. A driver, a team you don't expect to contend at the top level of NASCAR. Sometimes they break through and find victory lane. One of the best recent examples of this actually happened 10 years ago when Trevor Bayne, driving for a different Ford team, the Wood brothers at the time, won the Daytona 500 at just 20 years old. This is a great story as well 10 years later. Congratulations to Michael McDowell. I hate to change the subject or ruin the vibe, but he is now in the playoffs and will more than likely take a playoff spot away from a team like, Austin Dillon's or Matt DiBenedetto's or William Byron's. Just keep that in mind. I'm still not a big fan of the win and you're in part of the playoff format. This is the occasional drawback, but hey, good for front row. That 34 car snuck into the playoffs before, most recently 2016 when Chris Buescher won a rain-shortened race at Pocono. This is a pretty big deal though, to win at Daytona in a non-rain-shortened race. This has to feel special. Congratulations to all of Front Row Motorsports and Michael McDowell getting the win. Now we gotta talk about some of the dramatic events that led up to this explosive finish. This race recap is brought to you by Alka-Seltzer, available at Walmart. Now, the race started on time at 3 p.m. Eastern time, roughly. We'll talk about start times in a minute. The first incident of the race came when Derek Cope made contact with, it looked like he made contact with maybe William Byron and Bubba Wallace on the initial get up to speed lap. On lap 3, Derek Cope blew a tire, hit the wall. He was out of the race early. Kind of spooky that Derek Cope, the man who won the Daytona 500 31 years ago, beating Dale Earnhardt, who blew a tire late in that race. Spooky that he would blow a tire on lap 3 31 years later, 20 years after the tragic passing of Dale Earnhardt. Kind of spooky, I'm just saying. But anyway, that was just a single car incident. It, however, did not take long for more cars to get destroyed. On lap 14, Christopher Bell on the inside lane had a run on Eric Almirola, got a good shot from his teammate Kyle Busch, got up behind the 10 car and hooked him across the field and took out almost a dozen cars. 16 cars total were involved in that wreck. I think at least 10 retired from the race as a result of this crash. And it's a shame, one, because it's really early in the race, only lap 14 of 200, but two, it was a rookie mistake made by a driver that I think we all know is better than that. Yes, this is only Christopher Bell's second year in the Cup Series, but he's a very talented race car driver who made an obvious mistake. He had a huge run on Eric Almirola, and if you have that kind of run, you need to keep the wheel straight and hit Almirola as square as you possibly can. Christopher Bell did not do that. In fact, if anything, he turned the car slightly as he came across Almirola's bumper. We've seen in the past how that easily will turn the guy in front of you. It happened in the ARCA race just yesterday when Gracie Trotter, an actual rookie making her first super speedway start of any kind, hooked the leader early on in that race and set off a big wreck. It was the same thing, except now you had Christopher Bell, a Truck Series championship driver, making that mistake, and that was unfortunate. The rain came shortly after this massive crash, and that's what led to the over 6 hour long rain delay. And here's where I will talk a little bit about the argument of noon starts, as I've seen many on Twitter promoting, versus the 3 p.m. starts we have right now for the Daytona 500 and for most of the races this season. I don't mind the 3 p.m. starts, 3 p.m. Eastern starts for most races on the schedule. It's better for TV ratings. It helps attract more West Coast viewers because now they're not rolling out of bed and having to turn on the TV first thing in the morning. Fox, NBC, they like the 3 p.m. starts because California gets more involved. But that being said, I have fully converted to the noon start time or maybe 1 p.m. start time crowd when it comes specifically to Florida races. It feels like nearly every year that Daytona 500 is caught up in some sort of weather delay, especially the last couple of years since they've pushed the start time back later and later into the afternoon. Because in Florida, I lived in Florida for a short period of time, and nearly every day in the mid to late afternoon, your chances of rain are extremely high. It doesn't matter if it's the winter, the spring, the summer, the fall. I mean, obviously there's a greater chance of rain in the summer and the spring usually, but even in the winter, even in February, the chance of rain gets higher the later you get into the afternoon. So starting a race at 3, that's peak moisture time. Today is a perfect example of that. Of course, everything is hindsight. Of course, next year, Fox could move the Daytona 500 to noon, and it could rain at noon, and we could face a delay next year. I mean, it's all possible. I'm not saying this is an exact science. It's just a trend that it feels like NASCAR and Fox could easily get away from, especially after now several years in a row of weather issues affecting the Daytona 500, the sport's biggest race. Florida's weather is just so special, compared to many other regions of the United States. It's so unpredictable. It's just naturally wetter than most other regions in the country. Something needs to change. I hope next year's Daytona 500 is a 1 or 12 p.m. Eastern time start. I am fully committed and on board with that idea. It just sucks because the Daytona 500 is the sport's biggest race. It's the most highly promoted. It's on the main Fox network. It has an full day of pre-race coverage. It's the best opportunity NASCAR has each year to attract new, passionate fans, and if every year fans are forced to sit through hours upon hours of rain delays, you're missing out on a golden opportunity to build the sport up. So I hope whatever change they make next year makes sense. I don't want to see 3 p.m. starts for the Daytona 500 anymore. I understand those West Coast viewers are important, but not sitting through a 6-hour rain delay as often as we seem to do now is even more important in my opinion. So I'm fully converted to the noon or 1 p.m. start time crowd when it comes to Florida races. I'll be honest, every other race, I'm fine with 3 p.m. But do what's best for TV numbers. Most other regions of the country don't get hit with rain every afternoon the way coastal Florida does. Anyway, credit to the track workers, everyone working the dryers, everyone at NASCAR at Daytona for persevering all afternoon and evening. There was a good period of time this afternoon where it seemed pretty clear we were not going to get the race in tonight, but everyone stuck with it, and we got the race done before, not quite before midnight, a little after midnight, but still not terrible, not as bad as 2012. Tremendous job getting the race done on its scheduled date. Well, technically, sort of, you know what I'm saying. Great job overall. Once the race got back going green, it was pretty clear there was a different vibe, a different atmosphere. None of the drivers wanted to make daring or aggressive moves. We saw a lot of single file racing at the end of stage 1. We saw a lot of single file racing throughout stage 2, and we saw almost exclusively single file racing in stage number 3. Denny Hamlin, going for a record 3 straight Daytona 500 wins, finished first in stage 1 and stage 2, and looked to be in great position to win the race, leading for the beginning portion of stage 3. Green flag pit stops though midway through the stage. The Toyotas did not stay organized. In fact, Hamlin's team was almost too fast on pit road. His teammates like Kyle Busch and Bubba Wallace, Toyota teammate at least, had worse pit stops, which caused them to get separated and sort of lose that drafting advantage. All the Fords like Harvick, Logano, Keselowski that I mentioned already were able to stay together much better. That's how they got out in front, setting up for that dramatic final lap. But Denny Hamlin, that being said, still ended up finishing 5th in this race, I believe. So the top 5 streak is still alive. Hamlin was clearly a force to be reckoned with. You know, he's living proof that super speedway racing is a skill. Yes, there's luck involved, mostly bad luck more than anything, but you know, Denny Hamlin is the best super speedway racer in the Cup Series today. I think today, and really the last few years, has undeniably proved that. I don't know that he's the best super speedway racer of all time. Dale Earnhardt, you know, they say he could see the air. You know, I'm not quite sure if he's as good as Earnhardt, but he's certainly in that conversation. I think that's a conversation we should easily be able to have at this point. There were some other notable moments I skipped over. You know, we'll talk about this race broadly speaking towards the end of this episode when we put it on the groovy gauge, but I do want to mention, you know, the disappointing part of this race is that they spent so much time running single file, and we know it's not the car's fault because this is the same rules package that has put on some of the most entertaining and most competitive plate or super speedway races in the last 2 years. But after that massive crash on lap 14, it felt like just everyone kind of bought into the idea that we're going to take things easy until lap 198, more or less, you know? And so we didn't see much action, didn't see much jostling for position. And what was really disappointing is the couple times we did see any sort of jostling for position, it often resulted in a wreck. See, of course, that initial wreck with, you know, Bell and Almirola setting off a huge thing. And in the middle of stage 2, when the field came together during green flag pit stops, there was some 2 and 3 wide for a moment, and almost instantly, Christopher Bell cuts a tire. Really didn't have anything to do with the racing, but Bell cuts a tire and sets off a multi-car wreck. And then, of course, at the end of the race, they waited until the very end of stage 3 to get side by side, and almost instantly a huge fiery crash ensued. So that was a bit, I'll say it, that was kind of embarrassing, honestly, for the NASCAR Cup Series field, that they couldn't run side by side for more than like 5 seconds without setting off a massive wreck. Not their best moment, I'll be honest. We saw some great racing in the duels, so we knew great racing without massive wrecks was possible. We just did not see much of it tonight. Tonight was probably the worst super speedway race since they took the restrictor plates off at the beginning of the 2019 season. That's just my opinion, though. We'll talk about it more in just a few minutes. Let's look at the top finishers for tonight's race. Again, Michael McDowell wins. Chase Elliott, the defending series champion, ends up 2nd. Austin Dillon 3rd. Kevin Harvick ends up 4th. Denny Hamlin 5th. Shout out to Jamie McMurray landing in the top 10. A one-off race for him. He hasn't raced in like 2 years, and he had that whole front splitter like up off the ground after that initial wreck. He battled back to finish in the top 10, and his Spire teammate Corey LaJoie in his first race with the new team gets a top 10 for, I believe, the 2nd year in a row. Good night for Spire. How about that? I don't want to overlook Ross Chastain and Ryan Preece also finishing in the top 10. Ryan Preece was fast in qualifying. We've seen the JTG cars be good in qualifying, but he raced really well tonight. So kudos to Ryan Preece, a non-chartered team technically that had a great run tonight and collected some important stage points as well. Also, Kyle Larson in his first race back, first race with Hendrick, gets a top 10. I also want to shout out Austin Cindric, he's not really a rookie because he's not running for points this year. He's not running full time by any means, but he ran well tonight. He really ran well in every race he was in this weekend. The only big mistake he made all weekend was that speeding penalty in his dual race that almost cost him a spot in the 500, but he won the Xfinity race yesterday and ran up with the leaders all night long today. So I do want to give a round of applause to Austin Cindric. Really made an impression this week. I also want to mention Bubba Wallace, his first race for 23XI Racing. A lot of eyes on him. He ran well tonight. Again, he was up with the leaders, worked well with Denny Hamlin and these other Toyota teammates most of the evening, but he ended up finishing 17th because during that final cycle of green flag pit stops, they didn't get all the lug nuts tight. He had to make an extra pit stop to fix a loose wheel, lost the draft, ended up going a lap down. That's why he finished 17th. He also got tore up, unfortunately, in that final wreck because he was still in that lead draft, but overall, it was a really good and solid effort from 23XI Racing until the pit road mistake, but definitely a solid impression that they made as well. I wish I could talk about every single driver, but we'd be here all night. Now, before we put this race on the groovy gauge to wrap things up, I do want to talk a bit about the pre-race show. Again, I told you we're kind of going in reverse order. Let's talk about the pre-race show and the broadcast in general, because this was the first points-paying race featuring Mike Joy, Jeff Gordon, and Clint Bowyer in the main Fox booth. I thought they were good. They got better as the week progressed. I think Bowyer brought much needed energy and honestly brought the best out of Jeff Gordon, I thought, more often than not, but early on in the week they were trying way too hard to make Clint Bowyer happen. You know, they had a whole segment where they had drivers trying to give their Bowyer-isms. Like, he's had the job for a day, guys. He's literally, this is the first week on the job. Let's save the Bowyer-isms for much further down the line. He has not earned his own nickname, his own catchphrase. He has not earned that yet. No, no, no. They kept making Super Bowl jokes about his Kansas City Chiefs. You know, those got old very quickly. So when everybody else was talking about Clint Bowyer, it kind of sucked. I thought the content was pretty bad this week, but when Clint Bowyer was just being himself, bringing the energy, using funny voices and making his great, Clint Bowyer style analogies, I thought he was top of his game, so I'm really excited about how that booth is going to mesh as the year goes on. As far as the pre-race is concerned, Chris Myers was back, and boy, he is a tremendous anchor. This was the first time in recent memory where I sat down and watched a couple hours of pre-race coverage, and I enjoyed it. A lot of NASCAR, typical NASCAR pre-race is filled with filler and just kind of bland coverage, but today's race I thought was really, really good. They had great segments with Kyle Larson. They had a great segment with Michael Jordan, Denny Hamlin, and Bubba Wallace. They had a great segment about Dale Earnhardt, of course, this being the 20-year anniversary of his crash in 2001. They had a lot of great segments like that kept things interesting, great interviews. Bowyer, Gordon, Chris Myers were great in the, what'd they call it? The Hollywood studio, not the Hollywood Hotel. That's just insulting, man. It's so close to the classic Hollywood Hotel. They introduced some new segments like the Put It Out segment, which is clearly a ripoff of like the Come On Man or the Shacked in a Fool segments we see in other series, but it was played pretty well. I enjoyed that. They did bring back the Michael Waltrip grid walk, and with a twist. It was not Michael Waltrip on the grid. It was a cameraman with a big Michael Waltrip cardboard cutout. Waltrip was talking to the drivers remotely. It was an interesting idea, and I don't hate the grid walk, but I wish that wasn't the last thing we saw before, the pre-race ceremonies and then the drivers strap in and go race. It's just, to go from something goofy and silly like that to then something really serious and solemn and focused, it's too much of there's too stark of a contrast there. I wish there was a way we could move the grid walk a little bit earlier in the show so that we can get things a little more serious, a little more professional right before the drivers take the green. Oh, I forgot to mention, there was a great segment as well about Ryan Newman, and it had his parents as well talking about the crash from last year's race. I totally forgot about that storyline coming in. That was also a great segment. Just wanted to shout that out. So Fox did great with their pre-race coverage today, and really even with their overall broadcast. Jeff Gordon, though, someone needs to tell him that it's Bubba Wallace or Darrell Wallace Jr. It's not Bubba Wallace Jr. In fact, he's gotten mad when people called him that. That's not what it is. He said that like 4 times during tonight's race. And I heard him say it earlier in the week. I didn't say anything then because I figured it was just a slip of the tongue, but he keeps saying it. Someone needs to get in Jeff Gordon's ear. It's not Bubba Wallace Jr. You got to get that one right. Anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about as far as the broadcast is concerned. Let's put this race on the groovy gauge and then go get some sleep. Bam! That's right, the groovy gauge this year is presented by Swan Security. Shout out to Swan. Jordan Anderson, my boy, almost pulled off the upset for the second year in a row at Daytona in the Truck Series race. Man, I saw someone say if you take the combined intervals from Jordan Anderson's 2 now second place finishes at Daytona, both photo finishes, it combined to be like 4/100ths of a second. So man, that's so close 2 years in a row, but Swan was on his truck looking great. Thank you to Swan for sponsoring the groovy gauge. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but again, again, to me, this was probably the worst super speedway race in 2 years. Last year, the super speedways were fantastic. There really was not a bad race outside of the Clash. The Clash was messy, but outside the Clash last year, there was not a bad Cup Series race on a super speedway. So tonight was a bit disappointing. We saw a ton of single file, and like I said earlier, the several times the drivers tried to race each other, it often resulted in careless accidents. So it was kind of embarrassing for a lot of the drivers tonight. It was not great super speedway racing by any means, and that was a bummer, especially when you think about the fact that this is the last Daytona 500 with this rules package. This time next year will be a completely different car, and who knows what sort of attributes that car will have and what the plate racing or the super speedway racing will look like then. So a bit disappointing knowing that fact. It still was an exciting race. I still found myself, getting really pumped up as the laps wound down, knowing that they were going to make a move, albeit really, really late, but there was a move coming. I mean, I felt myself getting hyped up, very pumped up, but a lot of filler in between. I can't give this race a super positive score. I think last year I don't think I rated this race because we're also paralyzed by the Newman wreck. But last year at the other super speedways, I don't think any of them dropped below a 90%. I can't give this race anywhere close to a 90%. I'm going to give this year's Daytona 500, I hate to start this year out on a negative note, but I'm just going to be honest, it's a 45%. It was a slightly below average race. The pageantry, the spectacle, the weight behind the Daytona 500 makes this race more exciting than, an average plate race or super speed race. I keep messing that up. But between the careless wreck on lap 14 and then the lack of action throughout much of stage 2 and stage 3, followed by, the explosive, fiery, devastating wreck we saw in the final corner of this thing, it was not good racing. It was either single file or wreck. And I know these drivers can do better because they did better all of last season pretty much. So I gotta give this race a 45%. Honestly, I might be being a little generous. I guess part of me is just really relieved and happy they got this race in today, and the pre-race was great. The broadcast was really good, minus a few camera issues, I will say that. Some poorly timed commercial breaks as well, but the racing itself was bad tonight. It was, like I said, the worst super speedway race I have seen in a couple of years. I would say it was less enjoyable even than last year's Busch Clash. I think last year's Busch Clash, I think I gave a 50% because I just didn't know how to feel about it. It was crazy, it was kind of silly and messy obviously, but at least it was, I would say at least it was entertaining, especially the end there. Tore up a lot of crap, was not a great look for NASCAR, but it was entertaining. I really can't say that about tonight's race. Fun winner, fun story there, but not great racing throughout, so I'm gonna give it a 45%. Hey, good chance we go up from there the next few weeks with the road course coming up. Hopefully this is the lowest score we see for a while, but it's still the Daytona 500, still a huge deal, still a huge race, but that's my score. Let me know what you guys would give the Daytona 500 on your groovy gauges down in the comments. I feel like I'm gonna miss something tonight. There was a lot to talk about today. Thank you all so much though for tuning in tonight. Thank you guys for following along on Twitter. We did a live stream during the red flag. Really appreciate you guys keeping the conversation interesting, keeping this race special. I really appreciate all of the support, but that's all I've got for tonight's episode. Be sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel. We talk NASCAR almost daily. I'm super excited for what this year has in store now that the season has officially begun. As always, a huge thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters as well. Thanks again to Blue Emu, the official pain relief cream of NASCAR, for sponsoring this episode of Out of the Groove. Check them out. I will see you all again very soon. We'll have plenty to talk about later this week. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.